So thank you everyone for joining us this evening, or maybe morning if you're in Europe, for this online seminar as part of which is part of the Making Historical Dress Network. So as part of the network, as well as our in-person events that we are live streaming. So we have our, for those who don't know, I'm sure many people here do, we have our festival in September. So if you haven't signed up for that yet, I think all of our in-person tickets are gone, but we will be live streaming the keynotes and recording certain things. So if you haven't signed up for that yet, please do. But in addition to our in-person events, we are having some online events. And so our event tonight is sort of showcasing some of the work that's going on in Australia and New Zealand. So we have 3 speakers tonight who I guess are all speaking variously about what I titled the session, which was Deconstruction, Alteration, and Recreation, looking at garments in not just museum collections, but also found garments. And there's I think some really interesting synergies and shared themes between the papers tonight. So how this is going to work is we're going to have our speakers speak back to back, and then I think we're going to have a combined question time. So if people have any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A or the chat function. Or I think we're sort of an intimate seminar tonight, so also feel free to sort of put your hand up. I think you might be able to do that. I'm not sure if I disabled that, so we'll see. But otherwise, I can ask your question for the speakers. Okay, so our first speakers are going to be Jasmin Gray and Lucy Francis. So they're going to be speaking about restitching the yellow dress. The Yellow Dress Project, which was a collaboration of the National Trust, New South Wales, and the National Institute of Dramatic Art. So Jasmin and Lucy were both students at NIDA at the time, and you were working with Hilary Davidson for this project, I should say. I'm sure most people here are familiar with Hilary and her work. And so since graduating, Lucy and Jasmin have been doing amazing things. So Jasmin is currently working for the Sydney Costume Workshop, as well as the Old Government House in Sydney. And Lucy's actually in China, working as a costume designer. So I'll let you guys take it away, and I'm really, really looking forward to hearing about your project.
Oh, amazing. Thank you, Sarah. We'll just share screen in just a second.
Should be able to see it. Oh,
there we go.
Cool. Today we're sharing a story.
A story of generations of women whose work and perseverance has brought us all here today.
This is a tale of silk that has been transported around the world.
A dress made by hands unknown in a time and place where records have been lost.
And a garment that has been altered time and time again.
And fabric that has survived the test of time.
This is a story about a yellow dress.
A story that started while we were at university.
We were approached by the National Trust of New South Wales with the job of helping to restore a yellow dress found in their collection. Lucy and I, along with our mentor, Hilary Davidson, set off on the exciting task of understanding and unraveling this 18th century mystery.
And it all starts with the silk. Silk, a textile 5,000 years old that is now found worldwide and has helped shape global trade for millennia. The raw silk for our dress was grown in China, the Middle East, or Italy, where it was then spun and transported all around the world for people to dye and weave into cloth. The silk was a vital part of this investigation, as it was key in giving us a starting point for what time period we should start looking. The first step to understanding the design was to trace it onto paper before transferring it to the computer. I then studied the design and dived into researching the designs to figure out when the silk was from, as well as where it was woven. Through many, many hours of calling through the internet and looking at books, I narrowed down the date of the silk to the 1740s. The next step was figuring out where the silk was from. First, looking at China. which has very symmetric and pointy motifs with different motifs depicted due to the different climate and different botany of the area. The French designers from Lyon were too elegant, precise, detailed, and again, also symmetrical. And finally, the English designers from Spitalfields. They had so many similarities to our yellow dress, focusing on the more naturalistic designs and motifs from England and the English colonies, though not yet Australia. Through my research, I discovered that our silk had so many similarities to the designs by Anna Marie Gathwaite. Many of the motifs were almost identical, if not completely the same. She did not use templates, and she always drew her designs freehand. So from my time in London at the V&A, looking at some of her original designs, I narrowed down the date to approximately 1743 to 1748 for our yellow silk, when the motifs had become more natural, moved away from the French styles. Here are just some of the similarities between Anna Marie Gathwaite's designs and our yellow silk dress. We probably will never know the exact designer for their silk. However, we have come to the conclusion that it may be an Anna Marie Gathwaite, or a design that somebody stole from her, which was very common in the 18th century. So, Anna Marie Gathwaite was born in a small town, New York. Her father, a clergyman, taught her and her siblings to read and write. Anna moved to London with her sister as single women in their 40s, quite unusual for the 1720s. Anna began designing silk and started to make enough money to sustain her life living in the East End. She lived and worked in the same building, having her shop front or place of business on the ground floor and living and workspaces above. She used reference books from France and other Spitalfield designers she was friends with. She was also friends with men of note in the botanical communities who could show her new and exciting plants that arrived from the colonies and helped her gain access to the gardens and greenhouses of London, giving her an endless supply of inspiration for her designs. As a woman, she had the experience and the ability to imagine how her patterns could be translated into fabric before being made into a dress. Anna Marie Gathwaite is one of the 2 women who were designing silks in the 18th century mentioned by the Weavers Guild, a huge achievement for an unmarried woman whose family was not already in the guild. She kept detailed notes of who commissioned her designs and kept many of her original watercolors. While in London, I got to see some of her designs and got to experience the thrill of studying what she created and could see just how successful she was by looking at the number of different people, men, who bought her designs to weave into silk, sell to the people who bought the fabric to then take to the mantua makers, or also known today as a dressmaker.
Our yellow silk would have been brought to a mantua maker. The rise of the mantua maker was slow, however, extremely progressive. Up until the late 16th century, tailors controlled women's fashion. Tailors were overwhelmingly a male-dominated trade, who excluded women from their guilds. Many women instead took on low-paying roles within the sewing trade. However, a turning point for women was when a law was passed in France in 1675, where women for the first time were legally allowed to make women's outer garments independently from tailors. Mantua making coincided with women owning and running businesses. It was also a trade that was open to women of just about every background and class, provided she or her family could afford her apprenticeship. These women dedicated years of their lives honing and learning these skills. An average working day was about 12 to 13 hours. Labour was charged by the garment, not the hour. So to put this in perspective, an English gown or a common gown, like our yellow dress, was approximately 2 to 3 shillings, meaning these women would have had to make one or more garments a day in order to profit and live. Therefore, hiring a mantua maker was extremely affordable for women of just about every class. But before we go into the dressmaking, we need a strong base.
So think about when you get dressed. What's the first thing you put on? Socks, a bra, underwear? Probably not the dress. And just like today, people of the past had undergarments that supported, shaped, and kept one warm. Undergarments are an integral element to any historical dress. The silhouette can change the fit and style of a garment dramatically, and it was my task to create the undergarments for our dress. Getting dressed in the 18th century was no easy feat. To start with, there was the shift, stockings and shoes, followed by the stays, or corset in French, which during the first half of the 18th century were fully boned and made up of at least 4 layers of fabric, including 2.5 layers of buckram, a stiffened linen that I made using xanthan gum. The patterns for the stays were made by men using the arc drafting method. And unfortunately, our budget did not cover baleen from an actual whale, so I used German synthetic whalebone instead. The boning channels were sewn half by hand and half by machine. The hand sewn side took just over 20 hours for just the sewing, while the machine side took about 10 minutes. Then, attached on around the waist are the pockets, tied on separately and were often quite heavily embroidered, showing the personality of the maker. For example, I used the pattern from mouse silk to create the design for these ones. And finally, to give the dramatic silhouette typical of the 18th century, the panniers. Made from a heavy linen and split cane, they're light-ish and help to hold the weight of the dress away from the body.
The silk would have been draped and fitted on a client's body in a fitting, over her shift, stays, petticoat, and panniers. Using a process called cutting to the body, where the fabric was draped against the body, folded, tucked, smoothed around her form to create a beautifully bespoke gown. The ability to cut and design the new style of dress was key to these women's success. From our research, we discovered our original dress was cut from approximately 12 yards of fabric. The English style Allen-glazed dress featured a 7-panel skirt with roving fronts and an Allen-glazed style back, which is similar to a sack back style. However, the long pleats were stitched down, hugging the figure. We discovered the dress had been altered not just once, not twice, but 3 times from its original construction, with 3 different back pieces found, as well as 4 different types of thread with clear variations of stitch type and quality. By analysing and identifying the order of cut, we were able to truly discover what the original dress had been, to see how it then had been altered. You see, by knowing our maker's limitations, we were able to understand our own.
The silk was so valuable and expensive that, unlike today, clothing was constantly taken apart and resewn to reflect the changing fashions. The first alteration of our yellow dress was done around 1770, 20 to 30 years after the original dress was made. The dress was changed to reflect the new fashions by reusing and recutting a dress, unlike today and just buying a new one. The back pieces of the dress were now cut separately from the skirt, with the new fashions having less fabric in the back. The 2 skirt panels had been removed but kept with the dress, important for later. The back panel was removed and new back pieces were cut from the original front robing pieces. The sleeves were taken in and a slit was cut in the center back skirt to allow for more shaping around the waist. This is the version of the dress you see before you. The original dress was supplemented with contemporary silk from New York, and much thought went into which iteration of the dress we would be remaking. The later 18th century version was chosen as it required the least amount of alterations, and I dyed the silk thread to match. All of our decisions around this dress were made with preserving as much of the original as possible, while still remaining true to what the dress would have looked like and the purpose it would have served. From this alteration, we lost the dress for about 100 years until it finally resurfaced as
the second alteration. Done in the late 19th century, they used the unpicked skirt panel to recut a new front and back bodice piece, which fitted over the new style of corset within this period. We suspect it was altered for a costume party due to the large sweat stains found under the arms.
The final alteration was done sometime in the early 20th century by an untrained hand. The 19th century bodice was unpicked from the skirt and then taken in for a child's size.
Around the same century, the unpicked skirt panel showed a hem on either side of the skirt panel, leaving us with evidence to speculate that it had been used as a tablecloth at some point. What is also interesting about this is it was kept with the child bodice. However, the stitching was different to that period. And this is a state we found our yellow dress in.
And finally, we have a known history of our yellow dress. The Women's Committee of the National Trust of New South Wales collected donations in the 1960s, and amongst the donations was our yellow dress. It was put into storage at Old Government House and left alone until it was finally catalogued and its significance recognised. The silk was recognised as potentially 18th century, and with some funding, NIDA was approached to come on board, and as they say, the rest they say is history. The dress was poked, prodded, and photographed. It spent hours with us in the archives at NIDA before it was finally remade back into what the silk was originally made for, a dress.
It was my job to replicate the dress. This meant I was able to fully participate in the embodied turn, recutting, sewing, and finishing the 1770s version of the dress from start to finish. Throughout the process, we were constantly asking questions which, if we hadn't participated in remaking, we would have never thought to have asked. It was questioning little things such as the quality and type of equipment I would use, going down to details such as length and the thickness of a needle. Looking through archaeological books, 18th century tailoring books, and paintings within this period, I was able to determine what type and quality of equipment my mantra makers would have had access to and used in her everyday work. I wanted my experience in sewing to be as close to theirs as possible, minus not wearing a corset, of course. I had to do multiple stitch samples, as unfortunately I didn't start sewing until I was in high school. And when I did sew, I was using a machine. So I needed to train my hand to get a consistent repetition of stitches. By understanding the complexity of these women's trade, I was able to acknowledge the diverse aspect of production within the 18th century, to truly understand the object, the trade, the craftsmanship of a mantra maker. What I discovered was, what I discovered from my embodied experience was my mantra makers were highly trained and skilled. By knowing the inner workings of a textile, we were able to understand it from the inside out and truly realize why it looks and behaves as it does. The embodied turn is a term coined to me by Hilary Davidson. It is a term coined to recognize the process of doing, making, and remaking as fruitful methods that achieve academically valid results. In other terms, understanding how a textile is made is not secondary information, but primary. By participating in the embodied turn throughout the Yellow Dress project, we were able to not only enter into the minds of the maker, but the hands of the maker. These women created highly practical patterns. They considered the ergonomic use of fabrics, reducing waste by using as much of the fabric in the garment while still achieving highly fashionable and well-fitted garments.
The silk was a vital part of this investigation, as it was key in giving us a starting point for what time period we should start looking. The tiny holes left behind in the silk from the needles gave us a clue as to how the dress was put together and what alterations had been made. From there, we could try and get a bigger picture. However, it wasn't until we started joining the skirt panels over a copy of the silk that we found out they were all cut from one piece and we could see what was missing and which piece went where. The biggest breakthrough was probably when we discovered that the dress had been altered within the 18th century itself. We were looking at the few remnants of different silk threads, trying to make sense of the different skirt panels.
When it came to construction, I was constantly reflecting on past research, historical examples, and pattern books, as the order of construction was so different to the way we approach sewing today, and found that it is actually not possible to properly sew an 18th century dress correctly with a machine, because the traditional order of construction involved layering of the lining and the outer fabric, particularly at the shoulders, which you simply could never achieve with a machine, or at least not with the same finish. I discovered that hand sewing isn't as flimsy as well I believed. They used a diverse range of stitches to achieve highly sturdy and structured garments. They knew when to use each type of stitch to achieve a particular outcome.
People of the past cared about their clothes and they made them accordingly. The quality of the fabric has such longevity while still retaining its structure and feel. The sewing was done to last. The clothing was continuously reused and recut until 200 years later, cloth from the 18th century is a rarity, especially one like this in such good quality and condition. Our research gave us a glimpse into the past that history books often skim over. The working women of the 18th century. The legacy of these ladies is in the gowns they left behind, their work continuing to inspire us 200 years later.
Today we have shared a story.
The story of generations of women whose work and perseverance has brought us all here together.
A tale of silk that has been transported around the world.
Touched by the hands of unknown numbers of people. You hear them even now, the young women, the young men, those at dark boundaries of names not recalled, of no record found.
But beyond the lull and the silence, there is a sound with a specific timbre and pitch, and then another and another, arising through the waves of your focus, of your study, of your concentration.
The unnamed begin to own back what has always remained.
It is a pondering of strange words and elaborate calligraphy skills, of paintings once brilliant with now curious shades of green and rare crimsons and deep violet blues.
There are the remnants of golden taffeta and silken black lusterings that give us back each moment.
A specific right and a specific left hand, worked muscles in fingers and wrists to finish another knot or secure another bolt.
While a blooded heart dreamt and desired under a summer blue blaze as it eased into night mysteries of jagged white lightning and the echo and resonance of thunder.
It is the elegant whispers of history, Elizabeth,
Abigail,
or Faith,
George,
or Christopher,
or James,
as they help shape your words.
as they say to you and to us,
Sing me my
sing me my
song,
song, sing me
sing
my
me my
song.
song. Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you both so much for that. I've got a lot of questions, but I will save them until after our second presenter. And I'm sure, like, what a cool project to do at, somewhere like NIDA, getting to work with the National Trust. And sort of, I have lots of questions about how this has like influenced your careers in costume design, but I'll ask them later. So our next speaker is Carice Dalloway Davidson. So Carice is a collections curator at the University of Waikato in New Zealand. And so she's been working in the glam sector in both curatorial and collection management capacities for over a decade. And she's currently doing her master's, is that correct, Carice? Yes. And so the talk tonight comes from that project. So it's titled Project Archives and Material Memories, Embodied Creative Research Through Garment Deconstruction and Alteration. And Carice is sort of bringing us well into the 20th and 21st centuries with this project, but it's super fascinating. So take it away.
Thank you, Sarah. Just share this. That come through? Cool. Thank you. Kia ora koutou. So my name is Carice Dalloway Davidson, and I'm Potiaki Tonga, or Collections Curator at the University of Waikato here in the North Island of New Zealand. Today I will be sharing a little bit about the creative research output from a master's thesis, which is currently being conducted alongside my work at the university. In this research, I'm examining what can be discerned about the biography of a garment through the item itself, in combination with its pocket contents or other physically connected objects. Is a pocket a portable archive of a moment in its wearer's life or era they lived in, or both? In what way does a garment itself hold some of its history on its surface of imprints of the wearer via staining, wear, damage, and alteration? And then within the very fabric, construction, its seams, encapsulated pockets themselves, where the original colour may lie protected from the fading ravages of time. And this research seeks to contribute to the field of material culture analysis for historic inquiry through an engagement with dress history within the last 200 years. It's methodologically focused via the feature of pockets and their contents in tandem with the exploration of the garment as primary source for historic investigation. The work extends from that of Berman and Fenito 2019 and Carlson 2023, who have identified the valuable and rich area of study this is, though we're focused on tie-on pockets between 1660 and 1900 and the history of the inset pocket respectively. Both studies were also outside of Aotearoa, New Zealand. The work follows a parallel research inquiry of museum collection and second-hand store garments, both selected when found with pocket contents or similar. Two academic methodologies are first applied to the research subjects. Brown's well-referenced 1982 article provides ground for an object-based analysis conducted on pocket contents, and the work inspired by NIDA and Kim 2015 forms the observational approach to be conducted on garments. This textual-based analysis, centered around the slow approach to seeing, is coupled with a photographic essay inquiry into the garment and its pocket contents. Following this, museum collection items move down a more traditional research path, while second-hand garments are taken on another in the form of creative research intervention. The creative research output in this study considers the embodied process of hands-on close engagement with the garment, utilizing tools of deconstruction and alteration to share a garment's biography in consideration with how they might function in a museum setting. The practice of unpicking garments for investigation and reuse is not new. Just two examples of these exploring in this manner are Vida Cochrane, who creates exploded coats and garments, and Claire Batt, a member of this network, as I understand, who conducts seam butchery. Both undertake a process of garment unpicking and reuse in creative investigative manner for different reasons. There are also many practitioners working with second-hand garments for a range of drivers. The initial experiment with this activity, using an old pair of gardening jeans, revealed a wealth of evidence of its previous wear, including hidden color in its light-protected areas and barcoding on its seams, as discussed by Hauser, 2005, who shares the case study of a bank robbery prosecution based on the CCTV footage of the outer seam imprint of the denim jeans of the offender. This garment was chosen as the starting point for the creative exploration in this research, as I knew its biography, being the garment's owner, so could test the findings. Pulled from a box of items destined for the op shop, which had instead been sitting in the garage gathering dust for months, they were selected when found I had carelessly left things behind in pockets. In this study, pocket contents are addressed alongside and in relation to the analysis of the garment. They identify at the base level the suggestion of the simple fact of the garment's use and therefore a chapter in its biography indicating where. These also offer breadcrumbs to us of the activities undertaken. Here, the moist towelette and piece of placenta notebook suggest child-caring activities, which, being the mother of two young children, I know this to be the case. The hair tie alludes to the long hair of the wearer, the tissue, the poor sinuses I inherited from my mother, and if it were legible, the receipt would offer a clear date, suggesting at least one occasion of wear of the garment. The deconstruction process revealed a wealth of information on the garment's use, from the original denim shade revealed in the light-protected seams beneath the stitching lines, revealing, for example, ghost lines of machine-embroidered owl in the shadow on the back pocket, details of the different threads used across the garment, of which there were 6. This deconstruction began first by removing the belt loops. They were approached initially as they would swiftly allow the removal of the waistband, which would quickly start to render the garment to its pattern pieces. They were also a small part to quickly have in hand to experience. The first fully unstitched belt loop did not disappoint. The tucked-in sections and areas previously held within a seam clearly revealed the original denim shade. Its simple rectangle of fabric, but the years of wear were easily visible in the threadbare folds. They also left behind a shadow of their place on the waistband in a dark indigo mark. Following this, I soon got to the point where the button was excavated via a painstaking process aiming to retain the thread as much as could be. At this point, the garment was rendered no longer easily wearable. A particular moment of note. and undoing my own work, in fact, as I had sewn that button on years previous, replacing the original. Despite launching into this with gusto, notes I made at the time described that my fingers were itching to analyze through deconstruction, I felt a loss for this garment. I felt also mischievous, wrong, backwards, and cruel, rewinding the process of construction, the hard-earned stitches, the lengthy process of creation wound back to naught. Many evenings of unpicking later, and at many points recalling that unpicking was my least favorite garment construction activity, their jeans got to the point where they simply resembled the pattern pieces of their creation. Following unpicking, these pattern pieces are laid to understand the fabric yardage impact. The large pieces were then cut down into A4-sized handling swatches to be filed into a full SCAP 4-flap archiving folder. This, along with the pocket contents, unpicked threads, detached haberdashery, were all filed away into a neat archive box, its own tidy pocket really, ready to be tucked into some imaginary museum storage shelf, waiting to be labelled with a QR code to link it to its digital, textual, and photographic records. A neat and tidy essence of jeans captured into a physical and digital pocket archive. I felt the manner of archiving the garment may address both the harsh truths of the sterile context museums, garments entering museums find themselves in, never to be worn or touched again, alongside being catalogued with archival principles where the original order of the jeans and its pocket contents would be captured theoretically in the process of observation, analysis, and record. Its multi-layered narrative captured and filed through the range of methodologies applied. The next exploration in this creative research output was the crew blazer. This blazer was made by Canterbury, New Zealand, who are well known for their iconic rugby jerseys and were a clothing line manufactured by Lane Walker Rudkin. Found in the sorting area of the hospice shop in Frankton, it entered into the study due to a collection of ambiguous business cards and a single unused expired condom found in its right proper internal pocket. An intriguing introduction to this garment. Once further investigations began, written and photographic observations quickly identified a further chapter in the garment's story, also within the right proper internal pocket. On a label sewn within, the name R.J. White was inscribed. 2 faint signatures were evident, likely the garment maker and inspector, and what appeared to be the garment manufacturer information was outlined, dating the jacket production to the 7th of September 1984. The garment's biography was revealing itself, 4 individuals connected through this one pocket contents. Through my descriptive observations, I also noticed the buttons haphazardly sewn on with slightly mismatched thread, suggesting their addition following the garment manufacture. I noted all the stains, discoloured areas, fabric pulls and marks. As shown in the photographic essay captured, these all pointed to the jacket's well use. I started to consider further the individuals who were previously connected to this blazer, particularly that of the person whose business card and unused condom were left behind in its pocket. How could I learn more of this wearer, their place in history and use of this garment? The business card would assumed to be an easy tool, a communication method used to share an individual's contact details with others. However, this unique card, redacted in the image for ethical reasons, featured little more than the wearer's name and a 021 cell phone number. An unfortunately common name did not provide any clear leads, and following ethics approval, a process of texting and calling the number also shed no further light. A dating of the era of the business card via its phone number was addressed as the next research thread. Could it tie in with the establishment of the New Zealand Vodafone network in 1998? This then in connection to the expiry date of the unused condom as 2003, stamped on its side, places the potential most recent wear of this garment, for the use of its pocket contents, in the late 1990s or early 2000s, depending on the wearer's conscientiousness of the condom's expiry date. Detangling myself from the wearer or possible wearers of the garment, I turned inward back to the jacket. What else might I reveal of its biography if I myself embodied it, and then undertook a reversal of its construction process in the manner that I had done for the jeans? Might I encounter the previous wearers if I took up its mantle as a garment to be worn? And then would I encounter further evidence of the garment's makers, understand more clearly its imprint of use, reveal original fabric color protected within the seams, lint or additional small matter in its pockets. I'd been the previous wearer of the jeans, my first example, and I surmised it gave me valuable insight into the garment, the texture and the weight of the cloth on my skin, an insight into the design's triumphs and flaws. Whilst rather too big for me, I decided that embodying the crew blazer would give me first-hand evidence of it, as suggested by a section in Meader and Kim's observation process, where they proposed the researcher consider in personal reflections on the garment whether the person who previously wore the garment was bigger or smaller, whether the researcher themselves would wear the garment if they could, and consider how it might feel on their body. I undertook the first wear via a quick practical observational approach, simply to understand its shape and size. And following this, I undertook a day-long embodiment of it, styling it with my wardrobe for a day at work. Notes I took following outlined the experience of this embodiment. I noted I enjoyed the sturdy envelopment of the blazer throughout the day, though its large size made it less than comfortable sitting at my desk. The two hip pockets were invaluable for dropping a phone into each and a tissue with it ready at the right one. Deconstruction of the crew blazer had variances in its effectiveness due to the fabric and garment type differences. The indestructible polyester fabric has no change in color from its seams to its outer sections, though I felt an embodied connection to the original makers as I followed apparel construction directions for a blazer in reverse to unpick it. Firstly, the labels and then the buttons, being conscious of all the hard work I was undoing with each unpicked stitch. All thread was retained in their own individual archival polyethylene ziplocs, along with the pattern pieces as they separated themselves from the garment. I attempted again where I could to unpick large sections of thread whole to appreciate and analyze the stitching style of the buttons, for example, which I could see were sewn or re-sewn on following suit's production. Notes from the time identify that the stitching technique of these were very inexpert and erratic. At this point, I had run out of pocket-filled specimens with which to dissect, and so another trip to the op shop was had, pocket diving into garments with hand sanitizer at the ready. I was conscious of several factors as I sought out research subjects, one being that my examples were becoming gender biased, excluding accessories like handbags and wallets, and they leant towards the outerwear category of clothing for obvious reasons, that the more likelihood of pockets in menswear and jackets. I attempted to focus on seeking women's wear examples first, though many pockets explored later, and I had only found a woman's 21st century suit and short faux fur coat, holding an aeroplane ticket from Hamilton to Wellington and a crumpled up handkerchief, respectively. These did not spark my research interest, and instead it was a masculine green blazer and set of 3 men's suit items which caught my attention. Notes I made at the time identify that the garments chosen for further observation are those which overtly appeared to show or present their biography to me through their well-worn nature and their collision with material culture. In considering this now, I note there is a strong subconscious bias, perhaps partly to the influence of the prominence of men's-based history telling over time, as well as the suggestion of older, well-worn garments being able to tell a more valuable story than more recent history. An element of this is the limitations of the deconstruction methodology I was undertaking, which, as the crew blazer demonstrated, due to its synthetic fabric, despite being older than the jeans, were unable to take on the imprint of time in the same manner. The Goldwyn bowling blazer, one of the men's suits I found, expanded my research scope, for it was collected not for its pocket contents, of which it did have a healthy collection of lint noted shortly, but for the material culture emblazoned on its surface instead of hidden away. Across both front lapels and sewn onto its breast pocket was a cacophony of information in the form of badges and pins. Remarkably left intact upon its donation to the op shop, these signifiers proved not only to be the start in the story told across the surface of the jacket. I set about uncovering this chapter of the garment's biography. Its largest badge places the previous owner as likely being a member of the Bowling Centre in Lansdowne, Masterton, which is in the southern part of the North Island. The numerous smaller pins outlining awards suggest membership from around 1993 to 2006, as well as tours overseas, including to England and Canada. My noted observations at the time identified that in the manner of a rather creative forensic scientist attending to a crime scene, I ceremonially extracted fibers, hairs, dust, and lint from the pockets and tucked all evidence safely into Ziploc bags, aka their own archival pockets, for protection now into perpetuity, never to be touched by another hand again. Turning from deconstruction, I instead decided alteration and tracing the lines of narrative across the garment's surface might be a valuable creative exploration of this jacket's history. In the manner of visible mending, the archived life of the jacket is told in stitches across the holes made by not only these badges and pins, but insects, which during my close observation I identified had clearly also occupied the garment for a period. Markings of ghostly white thread archive the facade of the jacket, highlighting its previous surface adornments, punctured holes, and nibbled fibers. I viewed these stitchings as creative, imagined conservation technique to document both the positioning of the badges, where I placed thread through the exact holes that the badges moved out of, as well as filling in the holes opened up by various insects over time. The final garment explored in this creative research process of the study to date is still a work in progress and is part of a wider analysis of a set of 3 suit items which were donated to the op shop literally during my visit and brought straight to me, as they clearly suggested a story to tell from years gone by. Grouped together, they appeared to have come from a single donor. Labels identified 2 of the pieces as made by a local Hamilton tailor, registered as a company between the 21st of July 1937 to the 24th of February 1994 under the trading name S. Meltzer Limited. The pocket collections across all garments include a handwritten tailor's slip, a numbered sheet of paper, a garment listed note, dry cleaner's tag with matching wooden dry cleaner coat hanger, and a collection of hand hole punched coloured confetti. The confetti suggested wear to a wedding, leading the subtly striped grey-blue suit to draw me in with its potentially romantic tale. I had not yet worked with trousers, though I began with this part of the wedding suit as my entry point. Close observation of the garment shows intricate hand stitching suggesting construction during the earlier period of the tailor's business activities. How could I possibly undo all this skilled, painstaking work? My initial hesitancy when I encountered the jeans came back to me. I would not do it, I decided. Instead, this stitching should be celebrated. I am instead working on only deconstructing a section of the garment, opening it up to a point where it may lay flat and reveal both sides so that the stitch work may be easily viewed. I'm also endeavouring to follow the stitch work I undo with the same white thread used in the bowling blazer to mark the journey of the original needle. With this new example, I have also started to consider the process undertaken prior to the garment's construction. The fine wool fabric has an intricate stripe pattern of not only blue-grey, but buttercup yellow, black, and cornflower blue when examined in magnification. What process was undertaken in the weaving of this cloth? What might the recreation of a sample of this share in further insight? Currently, a pattern is being created documenting the warp and weft threads, at times a twill weave, at other points a basket weave, the weft threads dancing across the warps, revealing or hiding the subtly vibrant blue and yellow tones in amongst the sea of grey-blue, creating a subtle texture and soft iconic warmth of what I assume is New Zealand wool. The threads bring me to consideration of histories of New Zealand's wool industry, an integral primary industry across our history, with woolen mills up and down the country from the 19th century onwards. Key proponents in our economic and agricultural history. I have begun a trial of the fabric sample recreation on a small hand loom and envisage the swatch I create will give me closer insight into the subtle stripe pattern of the suit, along with the opened up garment revealing a 360-degree view of the wedding suit, its expert tailoring, as well as allowing for practical flat or rolled theoretical museum storage. Exploring these garments in a hands-on embodied manner illustrates how our dress material culture and their collided objects, when considered in relation to each other, are valuable connectors to the past in tangible ways. The methodology I'm undertaking reveals the lives of the past and what we wear and carry in new dimensions, tactile, sensory, and emotive, sharing insight on multiple levels and capturing the multi-layered biographical details of historical garments. Consider, next time you empty your pockets in preparation for an encounter between your washing machine and that clothing item, what does the portable archive you are carrying around in your pockets or attached to your lapels say about your use of the garment, this moment in time, or you as an individual to some historian in the future? Ngā mihi nui. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Kiris. Okay, so much food for thought with both of those projects, and like very interesting intersections in the way that one project is working from a garment that has already been unpicked to recreate it, and the other project is unpicking already formed garments to learn more, but both sort of learning more about construction and the owners in really, really fascinating ways. So I might open up the floor to questions. Does anyone in our audience have a question? I think you should be able to unmute yourselves. Let me know if you can't. Otherwise, feel free to pop your question in the chat. Anyone? So, I mean, I've got a couple of questions. I've got many actually. I'll start with you first, Kiris. I was really interested in, I mean, the project is fascinating, and it's making me think that when I go to the op shop now, I need to like look through all the pockets because you found some really cool stuff. I was wondering, in the context of like your wider work in the glam sector, are you hoping to translate anything from your creative project to, because you talked about like storing things away and archiving things. Yeah, I'm just wondering, do you see any like wider applications for the project, or has it made you think about things in your curatorial work in a different way?
Yeah, I think it's very much like creative, theoretical approach, but I think it's made me very conscious of things I'm doing in my work. I work at the university. I work with the archive collections as well as the art collections, and I think there's a lot of crossover with sort of ideas and things that just sort of merge and come forth in the way that, in particular, the way that archives are catalogued and processed, and the similarities and differences to how we do it in museum world, and perhaps the benefits that can be drawn from one to the other is an interesting thing I've been picking up and exploring with it in that sense.
Yeah, no, that sounds really fascinating, and it's like I look forward to seeing what you do with that eventually. So we do have a question. I mean, I've got questions for people, but we've got one in the Q&A. So from Margaret, it says, for Lucy and Jasmin, would you tell us which hand stitches that you found extant? So yeah, could you tell us more about how you, I guess with the help of Hilary, identified what stitches were what? And yeah, I mean, I think this like speaks to this bigger idea of unpicking or reconstructing to sort of learn more about the construction of clothing and the people that made it, as well as the people that wore it.
So when we got the dress, it was completely unpicked, except for we had a group of 3 skirt panels and a group of 2 skirt panels, which had like just a straight stitch, running stitch in silk thread done maybe 80% of the way down. But would like if we think it was unpicked the rest of the way, because it was, one was interesting was the skirt panels had been turned around for different iterations of the dress. So like one edge had like a waistbanding holes and the other side had like the pocket slits. So it was obviously like when it was remade at certain points, people had used the other ends for the top of the skirt and for the bottom of the skirt, which was really interesting. But yeah, basically only what we got was side panels, the skirt panels. But when the National Trust got it, it was in like to the children's kind of bodice, 1940s kind of, we think, in really kind of bad quality stitching.
Really bad. Like they didn't even finish securing it. They went straight over to the next seam and there was a
Like a long
to continue sewing. So
Wanted it quickly.
yeah,
and like
so
we
they had unpicked that
yeah.
and had that documented, that process too. Oh, sorry, Lucy, I cut you off.
No, it's all good. There's like bits of like the back stomacher we thought was stomacher, but they were back pieces, was like in like a sash with hooks and loops. So like there was a few little bits and pieces, but none, like only the skirt panels with the original stitching was kept.
Did
So
you
then
have like oh
sorry, I was just going to say basically I can speak on my perspective, not so much Hillary's, but we just went through just historical books and stuff to work out kind of what stitches they would have used, and then like historical examples as well, and then just kind of, at least for my experience, I just had a accurate guess, I guess.
yeah
On what they would have used. But I think there's also an assumed knowledge, I guess, in approaching that, because from what I know in making,
yeah, and like it was looking at a microscope to like look at the like, is this a silk thread or a cotton thread? And then like the 1940s one was like a mechanized cotton thread, so it was like they had sewing machines when they used this thread, so it was kind of a matter of us figuring out, like the silk one's 18th century, but there was two different types, and then it was kind of making educated guesses and like looking at stitch holes and like existing patterns from like the 20th century and the 19th century to see when those other pieces were cut out and stuff like that. So yeah.
I remember.
I'm thinking here about sorry, I was
just saying, I remember when Hillary went along and measured, when we had some of the original stitching, and Hillary went along and measured kind of the distance between stitches to work out kind of what kind of handle she needed to do. And she kind of, when she was resewing the dress, she would go back through the original stitch holes, kind of when they were doing the actual silk. Yeah.
Did you have, I'm thinking here of like what Kira showed us with her unpicking the denim jeans and the faded, and you could almost see the seam allowance. Did you have, I know you said you could see old stitch holes, but did you have anything like that guided you as to like how big the original pattern pieces were, how much seam allowance they gave?
You knew this seam allowance, which was basically the selvage, which was a half a centimeter, tiny.
Oh wow, so not much.
But it wasn't as prominent as a machine stitch because the tension's higher in a machine compared to your hand, because your hand's just, it's not pulling as much, so you don't have as quite a distinct line as what you would with a sewing machine. But we could see it, and like the pressing usually.
Yeah, and it'd also been pressed before it came to us, so we lost a lot of the creases from like a folded seam as well, which was unfortunate. But there were some creases still there, so like you could see like folded like hem creases and things that were just like really pressed into the silk. But yeah, not a lot.
Who pressed it?
Like not really sure. Because I know the National Trust steamed it, but that was kind of, I don't know, probably some point.
Somebody.
People just don't know. Don't know what it was.
Yeah.
Oh, tablecloth. Let's make it so it's flat for the
like
dinner party.
They had found the fabric because they were like trying to photograph something for their collections, and they went through this bag and they used the tablecloth bit as a drop cloth kind of for the photo, and then they realized, oh, hang on, what is this? And so it was kind of lost within their records, and then it was found.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could tell us more about like the provenance of the, I mean, because that's something that's really interesting, is I guess both projects don't really know exactly who owned it, but you're sort of learning about who owned and wore these garments, but from very different perspectives. And yeah, do we know, like, who donated it and like who
So
wore
when
it. So it's
the
like a mystery.
Women's Committee for the National Trust, like the volunteer organization, they decided they wanted to have a costume collection, like a heritage costume collection to then display and all that. However, when there's well-meaning women called for donations in like the northern suburbs of Sydney, so like quite influential, wealthy women, they just got all the donations got donated and just like left on someone's porch because they were like, I'll collect the donations, bring them to my place, drop them off. And then the actual people who worked at the trust were like, this is way too much stuff. We can't deal with it. So then it got put into like old cupboards at Old Government House for like a long time until people had the time and the resources and the money to actually go through and check it all. But so each thing that was in it had like a Providence card with it, but most of them were lost when it got moved from this woman's house to Old Government House and then reshuffled around in there. So yeah, kind of, we don't know.
Yeah. I've worked with like regional museums before and everything's like, oh, this belonged to Queen Victoria's handmaiden, or, you know, like gentlewoman, or because like they just lose the provenance of things, which is yeah. So so we have one more question. Sorry. Again for Lucy and Jasmin, how much of the yardage remained from the original garment out of the approximate 12 yards is the question.
So sorry, I'm just gonna read that again.
We didn't actually calculate that. We had 5 skirt panels still connected to skirt panels and half of the robe a l'anglaise back panel. So that was probably about 6 meters or so of fabric plus all the extra bits. But in our slideshow, if Jazz wants to share that again, we have a diagram of everything and how it was cut out from the original 12 yards. So you should be able to see kind of how much has remained. So that's the original dress.
Sorry, I'm just gonna.
No, it's all good.
Basically, once we transferred it on to a computer, I basically attempted, we had worked out the order of the cuts from the skirts because they were directly cut one after the other. And then from that, I worked out, because we had pattern pieces, and then I basically attempted a pattern lay on the computer to work out how much they would have needed to make that dress. Like we did not have a single front bodice piece. So like that was kind of like assumed in the pattern lay. And I had drafted I think like 4 different versions of bodices of that time and worked out which one fit best within the pattern lay. And that kind of helped me to inform that decision.
Because the silk had like a quite solid repeat, we could figure out which direction the pattern pieces laid and where they actually fit within the whole like pattern of the silk. So that helped as well. So yeah, we've got a lot of it. We're probably missing 2 to 3 yards, or maybe a yard or so. I don't know, something. Not as much as you would think from fabric from the 1740s. So we've done pretty well with the yellow silk.
Yeah, and I imagine they would have lost that probably after the 18th century because a lot of that would have been reused for the 1770s. I mean, as you know.
Yeah, there was a whole skirt panel that was completely cut up that we worked out because it was like there was another skirt panel which would have been the exact same like motifs from top to bottom. And so we laid out the 19th century cuts and worked out that they were actually directly cut from that ghost panel. We did it as ghost panel.
And the fabric width's like 22 inches. Is that sort of?
Yeah, I can't remember the exact off the top of my head, but yeah, it was quite narrow.
Yeah, I think 22 is like the normal for silk. I mean, it's really interesting as well that like you're in a way using patterns when obviously the mantua maker wouldn't have really used a pattern. And I was really interested, Kirisi was talking about how you used patterns to deconstruct the blazer.
Yeah, well, I used like a garment construction from my fashion studies, coincidentally, like instructions for like making a blazer to get that order in reverse, so that I was sort of essentially following the process in reverse of what parts would have been finished last, as opposed to the first parts that were undertaken in the sewing process.
Did you notice any like differences? Did anything surprise you? Like, were you like, oh, this isn't supposed to be put together like this?
No, I don't think I did. No, it all sort of made sense. It was interesting. I felt like it was quite very close and personal with the object when you're like unpicking some of the pockets and the seams, and there's like little like bits of dust and like lint and stuff coming out on you. It's very revealing, kind of giving everything away with the garment and the process. And in particular, like the buttons were clearly added on with different colored thread and things like that. And so seeing the haphazard way that they'd been sort of hacked on sort of thing, and stuff like that. Quite fascinating.
What was the I'm interested in, like, I know because you looked at a lot of other things besides the condom in the pocket. Was there anything else that you found that was, because it sort of like, it makes me think, I'm like, oh gosh, like when I donate clothes, like, do I check the pockets before I donate them? Like, probably get tissues.
No, apparently, because when I was, a lot of the pocket diving I've been doing is in the sorting area of this op shop in Hamilton. And I was talking to the lady who's in charge of that shop, and she said it's more common that things are left behind in men's pockets, and she thinks that just generally women are a bit more conscientious of clearing their pockets out. Apparently I'm not, but so yeah, that's one of the reasons. But we all know that menswear have a lot more pockets than women's wear. But when I was putting that tally together of the different men's, women's accessories, children's wear, and some pocket contents without garments, which I've found from museums and secondhand stores. If you bring into it the accessories, women's handbags does trump menswear, I realized, because that's how we carry everything around. It's alongside the museum and the secondhand store garments. I'm doing some sort of interviews with people on things that people carry around with them, in particular using the pocket as a space for like memory keeping, in particular thinking about things like tucking away special notes and photographs and things like that in your handbag, so that they're sort of on you, or keeping something from a special memory, like a note or something from someone in a jacket pocket that you remember when you're wearing that. So it's sort of another element that I've been looking at.
And I wonder if, like, did you notice that, because when you go now to, well, op shops, what we call them in Australia, I find like the quality, especially in the women's clothing, is like not like, it's just a lot of fast fashion now. Like you can't. Whereas I feel like a lot of those men's, and like even the men's section usually has a lot more like high quality like suits. Like I was thinking like some of those suits you were showing, like, have these been donated by, family members of somebody who's passed away, and so therefore they wouldn't really be like looking in the pockets.
Yeah, I assume for a lot of those. Yeah, and when I was looking at that crew blazer, that burgundy coloured one, and doing some research into the name of the person on the business card, I did find a number of people, and one of them was deceased, and so that was one of the ethics considerations before I approached calling them or texting them. So we did a process of texting with a long outline of the ethics and the university project, and then left it a week, and then sent one more text and indicated, please like message if you don't want to hear from me or anything like that. And then I did one phone call and just went dead. So I'm guessing the phone number doesn't exist anymore. But yeah, no, that is definitely like, I think in particular probably the bowling club blazer. It kind of just got the vibe of someone clearing out a house and not wanting to deal with it, because I thought it was quite remarkable that all of those badges on the blazer, just everything handed over. But yeah, no, in particular the whole fast fashion thing is taking over all of our secondhand stores, and not really much to find there.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you like, They'd be such like a, I think you could write a whole like article there about finding more in women's handbags than their pockets.
Yeah.
In, like, you know, the history of like pockets and
Oh yeah,
give women more pockets in their clothes.
yes. Oh, there's some amazing studies on pocket sexism. Yeah. Obviously the two books that I mentioned at the start. Great work on that area of history. Yeah, no, there's heaps there.
Do we have any other questions from the audience tonight? Please feel free to unmute yourself or put in the chat. Margaret has said, from my experience of working with costume collections, I'm amazed at what is left in pockets.
Oh, wow.
So,
I'd love to hear your examples, Margaret.
if you'd like to unmute yourself, Margaret, it would be you feel free to share what you found. Otherwise, I'm sure you can email Curious later. I mean, I have a question, I guess, for Jasmin and Lucy. Obviously, you were both students while you did this, and I probably should say for our non-Australian audience that NIDA is the Institute of Dramatic Arts, so you can go there to do acting, for example, or costume design, which is what Lucy and Jasmin were doing. And I was wondering how this, you know, I assume this project isn't something that you would normally get to do at NIDA. So it was like an amazing opportunity. And I'm wondering how this has influenced your current work. You said before, Jasmin, you'd never really hand sewn much before. Like, has it given you a newfound appreciation for that? Or yeah, I'm really interested in how like going through and like working with someone like Hillary and doing this project has like influenced your work in, because you're both obviously working now in the costuming world.
Yeah, I love hand sewing now. Like if I can get the opportunity to hand sew anything, I'll jump onto it. When I first got to this job, my boss was like, do you mind hand sewing? Like, I know it's annoying. And I was like, no, I'll hand sew all day, every day. That's fine. I love it. Like, I'm just like, yeah, I think it definitely gave me like an appreciation to hand sewing. And if someone's like, oh, you like hand sewing might not be strong enough, I'm always like, hand sewing can be strong. You just need to know what you're doing, what threads to use, what needles to use, and you can get the right result. So yeah. Yeah, I think like now I am on a machine a lot of the time, but when I can do some like more delicate stuff, I get really excited. Like it's definitely bread and butter. I love it.
And I guess because you said you're like working on Hamilton at the moment, right? Do you try to like bring some 18th century technique?
Well, I've been on men's and women's ensemble, so I've been making vest and pants. So I get to do lots of buttons, and you know, there's a few details which have hands on, but it's nothing like making 18th century dress. It's totally different. But yeah, if I can do that again, I love it. Yeah.
Yeah, there's always that really interesting yeah, like compromises to make. You know, I'm about to give like a lecture to some students doing film, like, you know, film and history on like costume design. So I've been like, but you know, this like, yeah, compromise that, you know, you have to make obviously between the design elements and what you're making it for and the historical elements. But yeah.
And also like I think because I'm musical theatre, like
Yeah,
there's an element of getting it done on time, and like they are like period costumes, but they're made completely like some of the stuff has just got this whole internal layer that the audience don't see, just to make it like more
easy to get on and off, and
like there's panels where you quick changing and things like that. Totally different to historical dressmaking, but still interesting. And I think it's beautiful in its own sense.
Yeah. How about you, Lucy?
Well, after uni, I went to London and I got to look at the V&A and like go through the like silk archives and stuff, which is absolutely incredible. But I think for me, like I'm living in China at the moment and designing costumes, and a lot of it is kind of more the research behind the yellow dress, kind of taking a longer look and a deeper look into like the why we're doing things. And I'm altering a lot of costumes, and it's kind of like trying to make the alterations more obvious, so then the next person can come along and be like, oh, this was changed to make it smaller, or whatever it is, to kind of make it more obvious to help the next people along and sort of to help write the story of the garments that I am creating or changing or altering. And just for the next, like if people want to look at all this stuff, they have like, it's a lot easier for them. just to fix and alter. And then, so yeah, it's kind of more conscientious in the alterations that I'm making and the things that I'm making to kind of preserve the integrity of the garment or the like history of it.
Which I guess is sort of similar, like, again, the sort of what we're talking about before, Kiris, with the like fast fashion thing. Like, obviously those blazers and stuff that you were deconstructing were made at a time, you know, in New Zealand when care was still taken, you know, sort of not in the fast fashion world we live in now.
Yeah.
And it's interesting in itself just to see the construction of them and how much care is, you know, well, we all know that, you know, with fast fashion we are losing sort of like, particularly like tailoring, like, you know, how to make clothes well because we cut corners to, you know, save money. So yeah, that looked really interesting as well, as like, you know, and I guess like the value of like, obviously you're not going to deconstruct like museum objects, but having almost like deconstructed collections in the museum, so you can like look at that.
Yeah, and it sounds like that's the benefit of that yellow dress project, is that how much information that gave you because it was deconstructed. Yeah.
At first it felt like a bit of a curse. We're like, oh my god, we have no idea what's going on. Like, how is this addressed? Like we had no idea. Like
there were 3 different back panels. Like it was, and like
they didn't look like back panels either.
There
like
was
so
many,
what's going on,
and so many pieces that were like, what is that? Like, what is that? And I think like, because I think by the 19th century alteration, that person who altered that did not know what they were doing. And I think that is interesting in itself, just being like, was that a child who maybe did that as a project, or and they randomly cut up some 18th century silk because they thought they were going to make a collar piece, which didn't work, so they just put it aside. But interesting how it all still was kept together as well. I don't know. Yeah.
But then when you think back and we look back at the research that we did, it's such like a great learning experience. I mean, like, understand so much more about the garment because it was unpicked, and we had to spend all of that time trying to just dissect what it was and how it used to be put together. So both.
Awesome. Well, we might call, I don't think anyone else has any other questions. I did see that Rosie Taylor Davis asked if you'd written up findings. Do you intend to like co-write with Hillary anything about the dress for like a journal, or?
That's the plan eventually. I think all of us are just super busy at the moment, especially Hillary, who's like just moved to America. So I think when everybody comes and settles down, that is the plan for the future. And I know I want to definitely go back to the V&A and like actually look at all of Anna Marie Gathwaite's silk designs and try and like hopefully find our yellow dress, but like just generally go deeper into it and research more about the women who would have made the dress. So yeah, definitely plans to in the future. Not sure when that will be.
No, that's okay. I mean, we'll watch this space. And Rebecca Olds has said that Hillary's giving a talk about it. So we should say that Hillary was the one that re-sewed the original panels. Is that correct? Whereas obviously Lucy and Jasmin worked on making a recreation.
I did the finishing touches of the original silk just because Hillary had to leave. But yeah, she was brought in as the expert, like, because our teachers were all like, we don't know like what the correct practices are, like all of that kind of stuff. The trust was like, we don't know. So we brought Hillary in to kind of be the mentor and like advise as to like, is this a project that students can do? And like, is it possible for these guys to actually do that? And so she came in and sewed the dress and helped us immensely with kind of everything.
Yeah, but I mean, obviously you guys, such like the research that you did on the silks and everything was like amazing, and
we all did so much work.
So yeah, Hillary's going to give a talk about the Yellow Dress Project as well at Colonial Williamsburg Historical Dress Symposium in November. Hopefully we'll see some sort of written or journal output about this, so we can learn more about it. What about you, Chris? Are you going to, this is part of your master's thesis, but will we see anything from you in the future, maybe?
Wait and see, I guess, I've got until 2026 for the master's. I'm doing part-time. So keep ticking along with that and doing presentations like this along the way to get feedback and things on it to help guide my process. It's definitely, I'm not envisaging that once I've handed in the master's it'll stop, and it's sort of just part of my creative and research practice alongside my work.
Awesome.
Definitely.
Well, good luck with the final master's thesis. And I think we're all going to think differently now when we go to the op shop or the thrift shop or the charity shop if you're in the UK, about checking the pockets of the garments that we are that we are looking at. So thank you all so much for coming. I think Jasmin, maybe she's dropped off, but that's okay.
Yeah.
And thank you everybody. Thank you out to our presenters. Thank you everybody for coming. As I said, this has been recorded, so we'll pop it online. And we might also try and like circulate details, so if people want to get in contact with you guys to chat more about your work,
Yeah,
or,
of course.
we can do so. Okay, cool. Well, I hope everybody in Europe has a good day, and everybody in Australia and New Zealand and also China has a good evening, and we'll see you all later. And don't forget about the final big conference for the Making Historical Dress Network in September. All the details are on our website. And you can sign up if you can't come in person, which I think all the in-person slots have been taken. We have limited capacity. We'll be live streaming keynotes as well as recording papers. So, yeah. Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. See you later.
Thank you.
Bye.